Welcome to the Texas A&M University College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences Peer Programs STEM Education Series. Today, Dr. Wesley Bissett will present Hope and Healing in Disaster, the Texas A&M Veterinary Emergency Team. During times of disaster, the Texas A&M Veterinary Emergency Team, or VET, is committed to ensuring that animals are part of the plan and not part of the problem. From working with local governments to create disaster preparation plans and creating new technologies which improve search and rescue efforts, to evacuation, rescue, and reunions of families and pets, the VET is giving animals in crisis a second chance at life. Welcome, Dr. Bissett.
It's great to be here this morning, and I enjoy all of you spending part of your day with us today. Really excited to visit with you about the veterinary emergency team and basically what the veterinary medical profession can do during times of disaster. I can tell you that this is a new area for veterinary medicine. It's one that's exciting, it's fulfilling, and something that you should really think about as you're moving through your educational years and moving toward college. There's so many different opportunities, and this is a new one. When we think about the world we live in today, certainly natural disasters happen. Now, typically natural disasters are weather-related, but the thing that they all have in common is they result in significant damage to buildings and infrastructure, that sort of thing, but then also could lead to loss of life and potentially animal suffering as well. So in virtually every disaster, animals are going to be impacted. The photos that you see come from the Bastrop County, Texas, wildfires during 2011. And the flooding image was actually from our most recent deployment to Fort Bend and Brazoria County with flooding along the Brazos River. I want to tell you a little bit about how this all started. And I can tell you that I didn't go into veterinary medicine with intent on going into disaster response and being a first responder. My goal was to go back to South Texas, which is where I was from, and do large animal work, work with horses and cattle in the ranches that were in the South Texas area. But I had the opportunity to come back to Texas A&M in 2000, and really it was 2005 where my career direction changed. So that was a long time ago, but there were two hurricanes that hit the Gulf Coast, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, that just completely changed emergency management and most certainly changed the role of veterinarians and animals as it comes to disasters. So if we think about those two storms, our school, our College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences had rather important roles. So we developed a human surge hospital. So basically people that were living on the coast that were in danger were evacuated to our campus. I've got some photos here that I'll show you in a second. We ran a very busy small animal hospital, had record numbers of admissions from animals that were being evacuated and experienced health problems because of that. Set up a companion animal shelter where over 1,000 household pets, primarily dogs and cats, were provided safe haven from the storm. And then we also had a large animal triage and sheltering facility. The photo that you see is actually looks very different than it does on its typical day. That's actually one of our equine examination rooms at our veterinary medical teaching hospital. But basically, to kind of give you a short form of the story, right before Hurricane Rita came ashore, we were given the challenge of emptying our hospital, cleaning it, and getting it ready for people that were being evacuated from the coast. Primarily, these were the population from nursing homes and places like that, people that couldn't get out of harm's way themselves. They were transported to our community. And we set up our hospital to take them in, and it actually provided an ideal place to provide care for them. Again, just more photos, different places in the hospital, but literally everything that you see there with the cots lined up, those are all animal treatment areas and part of our hospital. And it changed from being full of animals, this is as we were getting ready, to being full of people. We wound up taking in right around 700 people, primarily from nursing homes, but also from the Shriners Burn Hospital and others, set that up. Now, ultimately, when they first came in, it was faculty, staff, and students that wound up taking care of them, unloading them, feeding them, doing all the things that we needed to do to take care of that population of people that needed a safe place to stay. Ultimately, with the photo on the far right, the public health services came in. But it was just one more example of the impact that veterinarians can have on society. In this case, we weren't working on animals, we were taking care of people. And I can tell you for me personally, this event completely changed the direction of my professional career. Literally, it was exceptionally satisfying and rewarding to be a part of. And we got very involved in emergency preparedness and response after this. Now, at first, we were active at the local level. Here in Brazos County, Texas, we were asked to develop sheltering plans for animals that would be evacuated to our county. We developed both large and small animal plans, and then in 2008, got the opportunity to put those plans into action. Hurricane Ike in 2008, we wound up taking in right at 200 horses in our large animal shelter and about 600 companion animals in the household pet shelter. Our students were involved in the plans, our senior veterinary medical students, and it really wound up having a profound impact on their professional development. Hurricane Ike also led to the next very interesting chapter in the story of the veterinary emergency team. That particular storm had a tremendous storm surge that came in with it. So with hurricanes, very often you get exceptionally high tides on the north side of the storm, and basically the Gulf of Mexico comes ashore. There was a storm surge that was 30 to 35 feet that inundated much of the upper Texas coast. And the impact on animals was significant. Now, there were actually 35 to 40,000 head of cattle that were lost in this storm. Number of others as well. When we think about horses and household pets, we don't have accurate numbers, but it became very, very apparent that the state of Texas needed a deployable veterinary medical team to respond to those types of disasters. And so they requested that our college form this, and that began the next chapter of what's been a very, very interesting professional activities that I've gotten to enjoy. There were many lessons learned during Hurricanes Katrina and Rita and Ike. One is that animal welfare is impacted in virtually every disaster. Just about any type of disaster that you can think of, it has the potential to have a negative impact on animals. And that's so worthwhile to try and mitigate that, to try and prevent that, and to help our animals get through that as well as the people. Another important piece that was part of that from a lessons learned, if you think, I want each of you that are watching today, I want you to think about your household pet, your dog, your cat, bird, whatever type of pet that you may have. And I want you to think about the role that they play in your life and in your happiness. They're part of our families. And the one thing that we've really learned as we've been through the story of the veterinary emergency team is that giving animals back to people that have had literally one of the worst days of their lives, maybe they lost their homes, their town's been damaged, when you can give them back their pets, their animals, it has a profound impact on their ability to recover. Basically, what we're doing is we give them a piece of hope. a piece of the past, something to hang on to that will see them into the future. Now, this was recognized pretty broadly, and it was also recognized that many people were deciding to not evacuate out of harm's way because animals were not factored into the planning process. So that led to a whole host of federal and state level legislation that mandated that animals become part of the something that's planned for. Basically, we plan for them and we plan to respond for them. And we try and ensure that the animals are part of the plan, not part of the problem. And then again, it's because of that importance they have in our everyday life.
Dr. Bissett, we have a couple of questions about the hurricane.
Yes.
And the animals that came in. They'd like to know, first of all, did the people bring their own animals, the people that were evacuating to the vet school, did they bring their own animals or were they brought by outside rescuers?
That is an excellent question. And when we think about the story of the veterinary emergency team, really there are two different types of disasters. So with hurricanes, you typically have, with our weather service and all the information that's out there, we've got warning that it's coming. And so people are encouraged to get out of harm's way themselves. And so on the hurricanes, virtually all of the animals were brought to us by their owners. So their owners left home, brought their animals with them, and brought them to us to care for while they were evacuated. That compares to what happens in what I would consider a no-notice event. So if you think of flash flooding, tornadoes, potentially wildfires, in those situations, which I'll talk about as we move through our discussion, most of those animals are brought to us by first responders, so someone other than the owner. But that was an excellent question.
Now, one more. I
Okay.
want to know that the animals that came to y'all during the hurricanes, did they have any illnesses or injuries that had to be addressed?
So that was another excellent question, and that really points out the value of planning. So whenever you're setting up an emergency shelter, you have to think about just exactly what you've asked about. And are animals going to come in with health issues? And many of them do. I don't have a percentage to give you, but if you think about the stress of taking animals out of their normal environment, their normal habitat, putting them in a vehicle on potentially a long ride down busy roads and heat and whatnot, like we typically see in hurricane scenarios, many of them do come in with health issues. And so we had plans to deal with those. Now, basically, the processes we used involved examining every animal that came to the shelter, deciding whether it was healthy enough to be at the shelter. If it had problems, could we manage it in that situation? If not, we moved those animals to the hospital. But excellent question, and it really contrasts with what we typically see in those no-notice events, which I'll go over here in just a second. Just to give you a little bit about our mission, we do response. In other words, we're that first responder that runs toward the disaster to try and take care of the animal issues. We do a tremendous amount of outreach, education, service, and research as well, and we'll cover each of those as we move through this discussion. On the response side, we have multiple different issues that we have to deal with. So when we're deployed to a disaster, we're going to make sure that the animals that were negatively impacted by the disaster, either they were injured or they become ill as a result of the disaster, we're there to provide that triage and treatment to help them get better. We're also there to work with the search and rescue community. In Texas, we have Texas Task Force 1. They're a federal urban search and rescue team, as well as a state-level asset. And their charge is to do that search and rescue and find people that have been lost, trapped, etc. because of the disaster. They have search and rescue dogs that are some of their most important members, and that's one of our missions, is to take care of them and make sure that those dogs can keep working and give that person that's impacted the best chance of survival. Now, to do all of this, we have to basically set up a hospital. So I would imagine most of you have been to your local veterinarian with your household pet, and you know what it's like to go into a clinic and see what all is there. We have to create that in a matter of hours when we're deployed to a disaster. And our goal is to basically change a parking lot to a clinic or a hospital in under 4 hours. Now you can see some of our convoy there. We've got trailer-based units and tent-based units. And it's a pretty big challenge. Now to help make that all possible, when we are deployed, we go through a whole planning process, and that's kind of what you're seeing depicted here. This was photos from our most recent event where we deployed to Simonton, Texas for the Brazos River flooding. We have a whole planning process where we learn as much as we can about the area, plan our routes. We go through, get everything loaded up, and when I say get everything loaded up, we're talking about a significant amount of equipment. This is one of our equipment haulers that we have in our inventory. We actually have 13 vehicles that go out on our largest response. And again, the whole goal is to set up that hospital in a parking lot. So when we deploy, we do two types of operations. We do field operations. This is a field truck that we use to do veterinary medicine out in the field. And then we also have our base of operations. And this photo is our team setting up our tent-based units. And it's just a series of photos that you'll see that basically turns that flat spot of ground into a hospital. And we actually have 8 of these tents. And again, we can set all of this up in about 4 hours. So it's a pretty good task that we have to take on. But we have to be able to get that set up so that we have the tools of the trade to work with to solve those animal issues. In addition to response, we also do a tremendous amount of outreach. The thing about disaster response is that you have to have really good plans. You have to think through, just like all of you are beginning to think about what you're going to do with the rest of your life as you grow up and you go through the educational system, you're planning for the future. We plan for the future as well. Now, we focus on disasters and what types of plans that may need to be developed to limit animal suffering during those disasters. So things like evacuation, rescue, animal decontamination, shelter, etc. We think about all of these things, and we actually work with communities around the state of Texas to develop plans. Some of you, those of you that are in Texas, we very well may have worked with counties, the county that you live in, to develop plans for your animals. And again, you just have to have that plan so that you know how you're going to approach the problem as when something bad happens. And the key piece of the planning process is you really have to think through it. And you have to think about all the different things that can happen. But the important piece is that then it has to transition from a thought to written instruction on how you're going to solve the problem. It's important that it's written down so that the vast variety of people that are going to be needed to solve those animal issues can all be on the same page and can take care of the problem. And so that commitment to writing, developing the ability to think through a scientific, difficult, complex problem, and then communicate in written form in a way that's going to be easily followed is a critically important piece of what we do. Now, part of that is really looking at the situation on the ground in the community that we're planning for. There's a web address that's provided here. You could actually just go and do an internet search, just type in AVM APEC calculator, and it brings up a tool that allows you to type in your community's population, and it gives you the estimated number of animals. So this is, I think, from Cameron County, Texas, down in South Texas, almost 500,000 people, so 422,000 people in this community. Well, you can look there and see what the estimated pet population is. 94,000 dogs, 103,000 cats, and 11,000 birds, etc. Tremendous number of animals, and that's one of the pieces that we do when we think through this and we start developing these plans, is we've got to know what we're planning for. But literally, if we think about this community in Cameron, Texas, even if we're only talking about 10% of the population being impacted, that's still a tremendous number of animals. Almost 10,000 dogs, a little over 10,000 cats. So a lot of animals that can potentially be in harm's way that we have to plan for. And it is important to plan. I want you to look at this photo right here. This actually is from flooding several years ago in Colorado. And this little dog here is getting ready to go be evacuated via helicopter. Now, look at the little pup there, and does he look particularly comfortable? You know, he's probably never been on a helicopter ride. And so planning how he's gonna get in that helicopter, be evacuated safely, is really, really important. And you have to think about a lot of different things. You have to think about his welfare. Is this going to be good for him? You have to think about biosecurity. So with biosecurity, we're thinking about how diseases move through populations, safety, information management, et cetera. A whole lot of different things to think about just to get that little guy on that helicopter and out of harm's way. Now, a key piece of this is providing good containment. We're all used to our household pets and how they act. But whenever we take them into a different situation where we're moving them with a lot of other animals maybe that they don't know, they've never been around, we're moving them very quickly, you really have to make sure that they're in crates, in kennels, safely contained so that they don't get away. You can imagine, thinking back to that previous photo, of the problems that would happen if our little pup that was in that photo wasn't really contained in that helicopter. So a lot of different things to think about. And it can be a really challenging problem. 1,000 animals, what do you need? You know, what do you need to take care of that many animals? 1,000 kennels, leashes, collars, food bowls, etc. It is really a challenging problem that if you haven't committed the time to thinking through the problem, you're not going to be ready for it. You have to think about facility and space utilization. In your classrooms that you're all in as we speak, there's space can be used in a variety of different ways. Important thing that we think about is how space impacts disease transmission. So if we've got a sick pup or a sick cat in part of the shelter, one of the things that we try and make do is to not allow that animal's disease to spread through that population. So we think about airflow. What direction is the wind blowing? If it's an open facility, or if it's in a climate-controlled facility, we think about where does the air come from, and where's the return air on the air conditioning system. We think about all of those things so that we can provide the most efficient space possible to get them taken care of and to have them basically be able to go home happy and healthy is always our goal. We also get involved in rescue. This is a photo from our Brazos River response, one of our team members. We also have a water rescue specialist there in the tan shirt. They're out in a boat and they're in a flooded area looking for animals that are out in these floodwaters. We treated in the Brazos River flooding response, we treated over 700 animals in 16 days. And many of those animals were brought out of floodwaters, just like you see, and needed our help. Now, this is where it's different than the question earlier on the hurricane evacuation. Most of the animals that we see in this type of deployment, the owners aren't there, and so it's a first responder that's bringing them to us. This is a photo also from Brazos River, just simply providing shelter. There were 500 animals in the Brazoria County shelter, and we had to think about space and how it impacted disease. We had to think about how to provide care to all these animals, and we worked with local officials that were part of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service to make all of that happen. And the key thing is that the basis of good emergency sheltering is just sound, normal operating procedures, making sure that we're thinking about disease transmission, we're thinking about managing information, et cetera, in a sound, efficient way.
Dr. Bissett, we have a couple more questions that kind of go along with this.
Okay.
One is, we have a class that would like to know, do y'all ever have people who are unwilling to leave their animals with you, either in the mobile hospitals or in the shelter settings?
So that is a great question. And if we go back, think back to the first of the discussion today, before Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005, there weren't plans for animals. Animals were not included. And you very much had people making the decision whenever they would go to evacuate, and then they couldn't take their animals, they didn't evacuate. They stayed and went through the hurricanes. And unfortunately, many of them lost their life. And so, you know, they're part of our families. And if we don't take care of them, people will make that decision to stay.
And then we have one more question, and that is, are the disaster plans the same from one location to another?
No, that is another great question. So there are a whole host of different things that we have to think about. One, what are the risks in the area? And so just the nature of the risk will result in different plans. There are other pieces of the puzzle that make things different as well. One of those is resources. So what types of facilities are available to be used for animals? How many people do they have that can participate? All of those things make each emergency plan for each different area that we work with very, very different. And you have to factor in the local on-the-ground situation to have the most effective plan. If you think about it, if we had one plan that fit all, but it required a lot of people to pull it off, and communities that didn't have many people, they wouldn't be able to take care of those animal issues. And you can see here, just in emergency sheltering, all the things that you have to think about, health requirements, how do you admit animals, if you have to quarantine them, if you have to keep them by themselves so that they don't spread disease, how do you do all those things? And it very much has to be written to each community to make sure it's effective. Great questions. So this is a complicated topic, and one of the things that we've been very fortunate here at Texas A&M College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences is we've been able to build this into our educational system. So we have the nation's only required clinical rotation in veterinary medical emergency preparedness and response. So we've been doing this since 2012. So every single vet student that graduates from our college spends 2 weeks with myself and our team immersed in emergency preparedness and response. And it has a tremendous impact. This is a quote from a student that went on a deployment with us, and I'll read it to you real quick. When I say this rotation changed me, it changed me the way in which I perceive my duties within the veterinary profession. It has allowed me to take a step back from the algorithms of medicine and precision of surgery to ask myself, when the time comes, can I use my skills to help my neighbors? Will I? Veterinarians have the power to change people's lives and in turn save people's lives. That was from a student that deployed with us, actually to the West Texas fertilizer plant explosion in 2013. Veterinarians have the ability to help. And that's what this young person was referring to. We have the ability to help when people are having their very worst day. From a service perspective, I mentioned that we take care of search and rescue dogs and horses. They are important pieces of the emergency response cycle. We do research to identify new ways to to make things better. These are 2 different decontamination units that you see. The one on the right, the gray one, was our first unit, and it's basically provides us a tool that where we can put animals in that may have a toxic substance on them, and be able to put them into a contained piece of equipment and get them cleaned so that we can limit not only the dangers that the chemicals may provide to the animal, but it also keeps us safe. And so we are constantly looking for new ways to solve problems. We work with a variety of different people. We've got 45 faculty and staff that are part of our team. And we work with experts from around the country to make sure that our team is prepared to handle whatever hazard winds up being assigned to us.
Before we go into deployments real quick, I'm going to feed you a couple more questions.
Okay.
Or just one, actually. This is a class that would like to know, how do you handle the cost of these situations? Where is the funding found?
That's another great question. So Texas A&M University and the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences has funded most of our efforts. We also have a number of different supporters or donors that have provided financial assistance to us, and that meets our everyday operating budget. When we deploy, being a state asset, and we're actually a federal asset for infectious disease response, then we can submit our expenses after we get through with the deployment to the federal government, and we get reimbursed at a 75% rate. So if we spend $100,000, we're going to get paid back $75,000. And so that's how we fund our team. And we've had a very active deployment history to do this, and you can see the list there. We were actually formed to respond to hurricanes. That's what triggered the request for our team. We've done a variety of other things. Have not responded to a hurricane yet, but we've responded to wildfires, flash floods, floods along the Brazos River, tornadoes, done some infectious disease response as well. We've been busy. We've been a very, very busy team. This was from the Bastrop complex wildfire in 2011, our first response, and I'm just going to go through some of these photos pretty quickly. And you can see those animals that came in and were impacted. Many of these animals we wound up having to anesthetize because their burns were pretty bad and painful, and so we had to try and get them through it without causing them more pain. This is just images from that tough area that we had to work in. This guy is a search and rescue dog. His name is Sarge. His job was to find people that had been impacted by the disaster. Now you'll see the bandages on his feet. Those bandages aren't there because he got burned. Those are protective bandages that we put on to keep him safe. And just simply tying our team with the search and rescue community allowed him to work safely. And those dogs were predicted to be able to work 2 to 3 days and then have to be rotated out. But because of our attention at protective bandaging and taking care of them, they were able to work 6 consecutive days. Another home that was destroyed in that wildfire, again, going back to an earlier question, in these types of events, these animals are brought to us by first responders. That's a Task Force 1 member in the yellow gear and a gentleman from Austin Animal Services that were bringing animals out of the impact area for us to deal with. Most of them had burns. We, again, had to do a good bit of work on them to get them through, but get them through we did. And we actually, in that particular deployment, we had 250 animals that came through our unit. 240 of them wound up back with their owners. This is actually one of my favorite photos. I want you to take a moment and I want you to look at that cat and I want you to look at his whiskers. Think about what that cat went through. So it was important that we were there to provide that care to make sure that he not only got better, but wound up back with the family. Photos from the Brazoria River flooding just a few months ago, back in June. 2016. These animals were caught by surprise by the flood, and literally we've seen animals in ponds and whatnot, but these guys were out in this water for days, and it can have a pretty negative impact. You can see the line of where this horse was in water. Another deployment that we've been on, and just thinking about the fascinating opportunities that this has provided us, our team members. If we think back to 2014, whenever we had the Ebola situation in Dallas, so a very severe disease that was brought into our country. 2 healthcare workers were wound up exposed to this virus and wound up getting sick. So how does that involve animals? Well, you'll see in the photo of, that's myself and another one of my colleagues that are taking care of, the little guy's name is Bentley. The Bentley belonged to one of the nurses that was ultimately wound up getting infected while she was caring for a patient. And she was very concerned about Bentley and what was happening to him. And so we had to take extraordinary measures to be safe, to make sure that he was okay and that he could go back. And this is how it ended up. And so you have Bentley going back to his family. That's important. That's impactful. That young lady that had to fight a very tough disease didn't have to worry about her family member, her Bentley, while she was fighting that disease. And that's what this is all about. It's about hope. This young man in this photo was from the Bastrop wildfires. He and his family were away from home when the wildfire started. They lost their home, they lost everything. And literally, whenever he brought this cat to us, his black and white cat was burned pretty badly. He told me the story of he and his family being away from home and not able to evacuate. And I'll never forget this moment. He turned to me while the cat was in one of our trailers being worked on. He turned to me and he said, "Doc, I don't know what I'm going to tell my kids if y'all can't save our cat." Whenever our cat came out of the trailer, bandaged because it had been burned, but alive. Groggy because it had been anesthetized, but alive. This gentleman started crying, put his hand on my shoulder, and I'll never forget his words. "Doc, everything's going to be all right." That's what our animals do. That's what our team can do. Whenever we put animals and people back together, we're giving people that piece of hope. That's why we do this right here. Those reunions where we're getting people and the animals they love back together. That helps them on their road to recovery and to get through some really, really tough situations. This is some of the horses from the Brazos River flooding. Again, not a household pet, but people love their animals. And when we can give an animal back to a person, I don't care whether it moos or neighs or barks or meows, it doesn't matter. When we can put the two back together, you positively impact someone's life. So my question for you at this point, so I've talked about what we do as a team, and one of the most important things we do is function on the emergency preparedness side. And one of the things that I would ask is, do you have a plan? Does your family have a plan, an emergency plan for those unexpected events, whether it's a wildfire or whether it's a hurricane or tornado? Does your family have a plan, and does your plan include your pets? Does your plan include those four-legged members of your family? It takes extra planning steps to be able to deal with the animal issues. And we do have resources available to you. You can actually go to this website. We've got some templates that will guide you through the planning process. And again, it's just the sole goal is to try and make sure that not only you get through a disaster okay, but that your animals do as well. And I think this is we're at the last slide and going to open it up for questions. But the one thing that I'd want to tell you is, as you're going through your education, I can tell you my own personal experiences. Veterinary medicine has provided me just tremendous opportunities to help. Now, it took studying hard and working hard on my education to get there. Learning those, the math classes, the science classes, the writing classes, all of those are so important. But study hard now, go on to college, on to professional school, and it will just open a wide variety of doors for you to go out and truly make a difference as you move through your life. So with that, I guess we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bissett, for that wonderful presentation. We do have a few questions. The first one is, how do you find the owners of the rescued pets?
So that's a great question. So one of the things that we do is if they've got collars and they've got rabies tags or name plates on them, we record all that information. Some animals have microchips, and so we scan every animal to try and get animals back together. But there are still a lot of animals that don't have any form of identification. And so we have a system where we take photos of every animal that comes through the veterinary emergency team, and those that don't have owners attached and we haven't been able to identify an owner, we work with our shelter partners to get that information out there. We have our own website that we put up with photos of animals that have been injured, that we've treated, and where they can be found. And so we work with the community through managing information on getting animals and people back together.
We have another question that says, what training or education is required to be a part of VET? Do you have to be a veterinarian?
That's another great question. So the thing about fielding a veterinary emergency team, it takes a broad group of people to pull it off. Yes, we need veterinarians, we need veterinary technicians, but we need other people as well. People that are good with computers, that can enter information and manage information. People that are good with social media, that can get the word out and publicize what's going on. Electricians, truck drivers, you name it. It takes a whole host of people to be involved. From a training perspective, there is, it's called the Incident Command System, or National Incident Management System. There is a management scheme that's used across our country to manage events, so that when we deploy, we're all operating on the same page, all the different responders. And so all of our team members have that sort of training. We have a whole host of other specialty type training from animal rescue on as well. Very good question.
And then probably our final question for today is, do animals get Ebola?
Oh, that is a great question. So that was one of the things that we were faced with when we responded to the Ebola crisis in Dallas. So what do we know about Ebola in animals? We know that dogs can get exposed. We know that they develop antibodies, so they develop an immune response against the virus, but that's about all we know. We don't know whether they get sick like people do. I'm pretty comfortable saying they don't get as sick as people do, but we really don't know how it impacts them. We don't know whether they can shed the virus and whether they can spread the disease. So there's much about that disease and animal populations that we don't know. And so what we had to, kind of the basis that we had to work from whenever we responded to that, when we went on that deployment, was we had to assume that Bentley was indeed exposed, that he was indeed infected and could transmit the disease. And so we had to wear all the personal protective equipment to make sure we were safe. Those are all assumptions. And that's one of the things that's a fascinating area that's ahead of us, is thinking about the research opportunities that come with veterinary medicine. You, sitting in your classroom right now, may be that person that figures out the linkage between the Ebola virus and dogs, or to the next disease in animals, and how that interacts with the human population. A whole host of fascinating questions out there for you guys to work on.
Well, that concludes our presentation for today. We thank you so much for joining us. And if you'd like to know more about STEM resources or veterinary science, we encourage you to visit our website at peer.tamu.edu. We wish y'all a happy holidays, and we will see you again in January. Have a great day.